After high school, well, during the summers, I used to go to my grandfather's farm in Ohio, which
Okay.
is east of Cleveland, 17 miles east of Cleveland, almost to Pennsylvania, little town called Chardon. I lived there for the longest in the summer of 1973 till about January of 74, and I would drive down into Middlefield to work at a print shop down there, so I knew how to do printing. But I
Nice.
went back to Chardon in 2000. It hasn't changed that much, in 15 or in 25 or so years. There's a few developments here, but it's still kind of the same place. And the Amish areas still look very much the same.
Amish country, neat.
Yeah, I'm from California, but both my parents are from the Cleveland area, and so I had that opportunity to go out there and learn the plants of the eastern U.S.
Oh, cool.
And in this last year, I have a brother who lives in Virginia. So in this last year, well, previous to the pandemic, I went out to Virginia and visited him, and I finished another book in my foraging series. I have about 22 books out now.
Wow.
my latest one, well, this came out. This was one of my latest, Foraging Arizona.
Cool.
There's Foraging California and a lot of states, but I just finished writing Foraging Virginia, Maryland, and the Washington D.C. area.
Oh, neat.
And it's a lot of fun in a way. I mean, really, it's a lot of work. Mostly, it's a lot of work to get it right, to get the right combination. With any book, you have a limit of how much space you get to have. You can't have. It's not going to be a monster book, so it has. I make choices all along the way of what to include and what to exclude. So my first step when I get a contract to write a book is of this nature, is make my list of the plants that are going to be there. And I have to appeal to more or less a beginner, not a total beginner necessarily, but let's say you in Indiana, if I was to write a book for Indiana, I'd go there and I'd survey it. I kind of know what's there, but what are the plants that you, Matt, would be eating most of the time from the wild that are the easiest to recognize, nothing endangered, things that you could find most of the time, not some rare thing, not something found only in certain conditions, but what's generally available for you to collect from the wild. And that's what I put in the book. And then I try to put historical stuff in there too. So I've done, I think, 8 of those Falcon guides now in foraging books.
Cool.
And it's interesting that people who come up to me with my books, it does happen, usually happens at the market. And there's, I don't know if this is a feather in my cap or not, but my books are probably read by more homeless people in Los Angeles than any other book, because I've seen them with this book. Several of them have had this book.
Okay.
And many of them have had. My first book, Guide to Wild Foods, has been in print since 1978. So that book has been around, and I've seen many people carry that book around trying to ID stuff.
That's awesome.
It's interesting. If I had to learn entirely from a book, if I had to advise anybody how to learn about wild plants, it would be you've got to get into the field. You got to go out with somebody like me or somebody in your area that knows the plants and actually see the plants. Because when I select pictures for a book, I'm not going to show a picture of the worst stage of the plant.
Right.
You have to get to know it when it's dying, when it's sprouting. But I have only so much room. I could put maybe 5 pictures per plant, so they're going to be good pictures. And they're going to, but if the plant is not in the ideal stage, on the other hand, you're not going to really readily identify it until you really know it anyway. So that's my balancing act as a writer, to always do a little of this and a little of that.
Didn't you, you mentioned the homeless people, didn't you squat in a haunted house in LA or something like that?
Yes, I did. I was in fact homeless for 6 months in Los Angeles, but that was 1984 after a divorce. But in 1977, I was moved into Highland Park. I lived at a little small back house, and I was working with a nonprofit. And adjacent to the property, there was a house that we were just going and doing volunteer fire clearance because it was all overgrown. And then and gang members used to hang out there and pass through there. It was kind of in a funny place where you could, where it was sort of like a cul-de-sac where people would walk through. So I realized we learned that somebody died. There was a debate about who the owner was. It was in probate for. So I don't know what the legality was, but I got myself in. Had locks changed, so I had keys. Turned the power on. Had a phone installed, and I maintained the place, and I kept it up. And when because all of the papers largely were there from the lady who died, it was real clear to us that there were two people contesting ownership, one of whom had forged a trust deed. So I knew who the property was rightfully going to go to. But when people came and asked me what I was doing, I said, "Oh, I'm just the caretaker," and which is basically true. I'm just the caretaker, and they said, "Oh, okay." And I actually sent letters to all the adjacent neighbors that said, "I'm here now. I'm the caretaker," and nobody blinked an eye. I was there a year and a half. We did maintain it. In fact, since that was really the first major place I lived in after I moved out of my parents' house, so that was many years ago, it was a really formative time in my life. I had a garden there. It was like there was a fenced yard, and I was practicing I didn't know the word permaculture at the time, but I was practicing permaculture methods where I was trying to, let everything take care of natural pest control. I did the garden of the Three Sisters with corn and beans growing up in the squash on the ground. I had ducks. We had a little wood stove that we, cooked food on. I learned how to do gray water recycling, so all the bath water would flow out. Now, I wrote about that in, this is my I think I wrote about it in this book, Extreme Simplicity. I'm not sure. I've written a lot of books and I talk about a lot of things, but there's a whole book. You may have read it, Matt. It's online. You have to get it from Kindle, but we do send copies out to people when they go to our website. But it's called Squatter in Los Angeles. It's an ebook on Kindle.
I think I read it. I think that's how I found out about it.
Yeah. So the haunted house thing. I mean, I had been there a year and a half. 6 months into it, one night, we're going through all the papers and stuff, and we kind of get a sense of what's going to happen. But one night, the doors started rattling, and this wasn't a big place, and you would have had to have entered a fenced yard, so it wasn't. And then it was a glass door, and we were just watching the door rattle. There was no earthquake, and then we were hearing dogs barking. So, until that day, when people told me ghost stories, I just said, they're delusional, or they're high, or they don't know if they're just making it up. But when I had that experience, now I know, there's something to that. I wasn't high. I'm not a drinker. I'm not a drug user. But I watched the doors, and it scared the hell out of me. Even though I didn't think it was a person trying to break in, I knew it was some kind of a non-physical presence. And then I describe in the book how we tried to deduce a few things. At that time, I was I had a mentor who was really a mentor of martial arts and metaphysical topics and things like this. And he had, I went to him for advice, and he had me watch, when I went over there, he said, "Come over at 3:00 tomorrow." Went over there, and then he and an assistant were watching The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. And I said, "Well, I'm not here to watch TV. And they said, "No, you are here to watch this show." And so we watched it. And then when it was over, they said, "Okay, it told you what to do." I said, "Really?" Because I'm just thinking I'm waiting for it to be over. And basically they said, "No, you should be watching that because it had the clues of how you interact with ghosts." And so the clues were, I have to ask, "What is your name?" And I have to ask, "What do you want me to do?" And then the assistant was saying, different ghosts, people who have died, who are still around, they may not be able to express it in a voice. I mean, something happened where her dogs were barking and the door was shaking. But so you could lay out papers. So I was given advice, lay out a bunch of cards that have letters on them. Maybe they'll spell something. Lay out all the important papers. And so whenever there was the presence of that ghost, the room would suddenly feel like ice. That blew my mind. And then when that happened, I would try to say, is somebody present? What is your name? But the first time, I couldn't speak. I know that sounds like people will laugh when I say, well, no, you had to have been there. It was like I just couldn't speak. And it wasn't like I've had a knife to my throat before, and I've had guns pointed at me, but that's totally different. This was just a different otherworldly thing, and I couldn't. Then the next time I just laid out the papers. I said the same thing, but I still found it was very difficult. But one of the papers moved in a room with no wind. One of the papers moved, and then we studied that paper, and that was the paper that had the forgery on it for who the trustee. And we were able to trace that back, and I gave that paper to the lawyers for the people that should get the property. And then after that, there were no more visitations, if you will, by the ghost. But it's an interesting book. I'm glad you read it. It's really, people, I've got some criticism on, how people critique books on Amazon and all that, they make the comments. So somebody thought it was going to be a how-to manual. And I said, no, I never said it was a how-to manual to how to break into a house and be a squatter. This isn't anything I ever planned. It just kind of happened. It's circumstances of my life. And so the book is about what I did. I gardened. I learned how to grow things. I learned that people thought I was a bum. I used to think I was like Thoreau, and just like Thoreau's peers thought he was a bum too, by the way, if you study the period writing of that time. But I fancied myself a kind of modern day Thoreau, but my friends and families thought I was a bum. I also published my first book during that time. I did all the typesetting, the layout, took it to the printer, and I had a publishing party where everybody helped collate the pages before I took it to a binder. This is old school, and somebody bound it, and I had boxes of books, and I became a book salesman. I had to sell books. And so in that book, I talk about all those things that happened in that year and a half. It was actually a very formative year and a half for me. And my dad would always be fretting, "What are you doing? What about your career?" And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Career? What career? It's like, we always speak of careers in a sense. You have to do something in this world. But I remember Bob Dylan was once being interviewed, and the lady said to him, "Do you think your career has reached its apex?" And he said, "What career are you talking about? I never had a career." And she didn't know what to say. It was funny. And she said, "Well, what about, I'm saying, like, what about tomorrow?" And he said, "Well, that's today. There's no such thing as tomorrow." And I realized Bob Dylan was a pretty profound guy, because he said tomorrow and the next day don't exist. You have never experienced the past. You have never experienced the future. Those are concepts. All you ever experience for all of eternity is this moment. And this moment keeps moving forward like a wave in the water. But Bob Dylan was cognizant of that all we ever get is now. The future is now. Don't keep talking about what I'm going to do. Don't keep worrying about what you did do. So I was living in the moment in a very pure sense while I had that experience. I did my first book. I had already been doing my walks that I did through the nonprofit, teaching people how to use wild foods. I've been doing, I don't know, when you find something, like you grow mushrooms, something about that turned you on. And now that's kind of like how I identify you with oyster mushrooms and growing mushrooms. But when a person finds that thing that they love, it's never work. Right. It's just the thing that you do. Right. And incidentally, I don't want to because you may use this over and over. People might look at this in the year 2050, but this week, Charlie Watts died, the drummer for the Rolling Stones. Right. And I was a drummer in high school. I still play drums occasionally, so I always liked. He was my favorite Rolling Stone, and he once said that whenever I played, he loved to do jazz, by the way. He was more of a jazz musician. He used to say, when I played with the Rolling Stones, it was work. When I played with my jazz friends, that was what I loved doing. I thought that's very insightful, because most people don't even see that dichotomy in other people. But of course, he's going to play with the Stones. It's one of the best rock groups of all time. Why not? Why not keep up the gig? I heard that he even punched out Mick Jagger one time. and because Mick Jagger said, "Where the hell is my drummer?" And Charlie came and punched him and said, "I'm not your drummer. You're my lead man. You're my lead singer." I mean, they probably all had an equal share in the legal entity of the Rolling Stones, which is something as an outsider we don't think about much. So Mick was probably in no position to fire Charlie. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's just that's another story. This is another book that I wrote. This came out during the pandemic. All the ways to make fire without matches. It's something I thought about for a long time. And then, do you mind me showing you my books?
Oh, please. Yeah. Let me see.
This one, Outdoor Survival Skills by Larry Dean Olsen. So everybody who teaches survival skills today, the ones who teach like bushcraft, living off the land, primitive skills, Larry Dean, they all pretty much directly or indirectly have some lineage to Larry Dean Olsen. Now, just as a word as to who he is, he was brought up as a Mormon, and all the Mormons, here's a family picture of him in the early days. Can you see that? He and his wife going out camping. And so he would go out, Mormon's whole thing was be prepared for emergencies. That's a good idea. When I first started doing classes, I had a lot of Mormons coming to my classes who lived in the LA areas. And it's an interesting group of people. I had Larry Dean Olsen's book in the early days, and I learned a lot out of this book: how to make fire, how to weave, how to do flint knapping, how to make arrowheads, how to make bows. And so over the years, I finally got in touch with him. And then I was the editor of Wilderness Way magazine for a few years and was interacting with Larry. He was up in Idaho at the time, but his early classes at Brigham Young University attracted a lot of people, mostly Mormons at that time. And then he taught a class where you would go out for 30 days with very little gear. You'd take a blanket and a can for cooking and your shoes, but very little gear. He was the original wilderness survivalist. And then, you'd eat lizards and whatever greens you could find and maybe catch fish. And usually you go hungry and you're cold for the month. Oh. They were month-long treks. And the original ones were 300 miles you walked, then they whittled that down to 100 miles. See, to me, I'm not into that because that 100 miles in a month, you're walking most of the time. I just assume go somewhere, spend a few days, maybe walk a little bit and practice your skills and get better at your skills. But the Boulder Outdoor Survival School began with Larry Dean Olsen, or students of Larry Dean Olsen. That's still in effect today. A lot of people go through Boulder Outdoor Survival School. And then he started an event called the Rabbit Stick Rendezvous, where wilderness instructors got together once a year. And I think in the beginning, the very first year, there were like 10 instructors and 2 or 3 paid people. But Rabbit Stick Rendezvous was carried on by one of the close associates of Larry Dean Olsen, which is Dave Westcott. He's still doing it to this day. It meets up in Idaho every September. So a lot of the TV people don't know it, but there's a lineage through Larry Dean Olsen and Ron Hood, who was really big. Ron Hood had all these survival videos. And then you have a lot of knockoffs, people who are just jumping in, want to make money. And I'm not saying that, everybody had to know Larry Dean Olsen. Larry Dean Olsen brought it to the broader audience. So knowing it or not knowing it, most of them trace some direction back to Larry Dean Olsen. Now, this last version of the book, the publisher contacted me. These are all my photos in this book now. And cool. I was the editor. Larry Dean died about 2 years ago. So then I edited and produced all the color photos for the book. So I'm very happy about it. It's a really good book. And then another mentor of mine, I should mention, I don't know if I use his picture anywhere, but you've heard of Yo Gibbons?
No.
Really?
No.
Wow. Okay, let me see if I can find something. That's right. You're a young guy. You're about 22 or something, right?
Just about. All right.
Just about 22. There. Okay, so here's a picture of me and Yo Gibbons. I don't know if you can see that.
Pull it back a little bit. No, it's not coming through. Oh, there. Are you on the right?
The guy with the white hair is Yale Gibbons. The guy with the long hair is me.
And when's that picture from?
1975.
Wow.
So Yale Gibbons, some of your viewers will know who Yale Gibbons was. People have been teaching wild foods forever. Native people have been living it forever. But in the late 60s, early 70s, Yale Gibbons was hired by Post Grape Nuts cereal. Now, Post Grape Nut cereal has no grapes and no nuts, but otherwise it's a good name. And he did their commercials. He'd be in a swamp eating a cattail saying, reminds me of Post Grape Nuts. And he did some very popular commercials. And then the FTC took it off the air saying that, it might be dangerous to suggest that people go out and eat wild foods. Huh. And then, so I met him, but he wrote all these books, Stalking the Wild Asparagus, Stalking the Blue-Eyed Scallop, Stalking the Good Life. He wrote a lot of books in the 70s. They were very successful books. He did some articles for National Geographic. He worked for the Boy Scouts. He was a very in-demand speaker. And so when he came to Pasadena in 1975, that's when I met him, because by that time I've been teaching for over 2 years or so in Pasadena area. And they used to call me the Yale Gibbons of Pasadena. And so I was up there at a press conference. I met him. The only time I met him, we talked for an hour or so, and he died at the end of that year. He died a year later. And so what I'm getting at is everybody, including me, any of the authors of wild foods, any of the teachers of wild foods, guys like Mike Krebel. Mike Krebel wrote A Forager's Life, and guys like John Kalish in the Northwest and Stephen Brill in New York. There's a lot of key people in the United States who clearly trace their lineage of what they do and their inspiration to Yale Gibbons. So I know there's a few people out there who are survival teachers or wild food teachers or whatever, who act like they invented fire, like they're the first ones who ever did this. I was actually criticized once by somebody who said, why do you mention so many people's names in my books? I always give credit to people that taught me one thing, taught me many things. I credit my mentors, many of them, and there have been lots. And I have to say, I do that because I like them. I value what they taught me. And I don't want to pretend that I'm somehow an island who figured all this out on my own. I'm not nearly that smart, And then also, a very pragmatic reason, all the names that I mentioned in any books that I write, guess what? That person, they see their picture and they want to show it to their family. And they see their name and they say, guess what? I mentioned in this. So it's a very, very pragmatic reason people like seeing this, being included in the project. And so I have a friend who looked at one of my books. I think it was probably my Foraging California book. And he said, you have about 44 people that you've mentioned in here. That's amazing. And then he showed me a very popular book that he purchased online from a guy who's like a TV star guy. And he said he mentions hardly any, doesn't give any credit to anybody. And well, there's reasons for that. I don't want to get into that, but it's important to not have too big of an ego, to think that you're the greatest thing that ever walked the face of the earth. It's important to realize that, I have different communities that I work with, and I feel very grateful every single day that I learned from these individuals, that I had the good fortune to learn from these individuals. And frankly, you too, Matt. I mean, our mutual friend Jane introduced me to you. Yeah. I got to go to your house, learn about mushroom growth, and just meet you. You had a fascinating little permaculture thing going in your own yard. And I have another book coming out. It was delayed because of the pandemic, but people will notice there's a book that will be out maybe in a few months called An Urban Survival Guide. This is by the same publisher who does this. And there's going to be a chapter about you growing food in the, because you grew the food, is certainly in your backyard. You had recycled cardboard and coffee grounds, and clearly somebody living in an apartment could grow food if they had to. I think that's really important, even if you're not in the dense city. Like I wrote 2 books that have to do with the city, because that's where most people are. I wrote this one. This is my 20 years of living in Highland Park. Extreme Simplicity, and it's about how we raised our animals, grew our food, had bees, recycled water, collected rainwater, produced electricity, had solar water heating. We did all the things that people think you have to be on the farm to do. And then as a follow-up, I wrote this book, Self-Sufficient Home. So this is where I went out and I interviewed other people who did similar things. And one of the main things I brought up in this book is that we waste so much energy, largely because houses are built poorly. And it doesn't matter if you live in California or Florida, or you live up in Minnesota or live in Indiana. Houses are built poorly. And if houses were built with thicker walls and insulated walls from the get-go, you could use like 90% less, and I'm not exaggerating, 90% less fuel to cool the place and 90% less fuel to heat the place. It's all about, creating a good structure, but people don't, because our whole society, it's all about the dollar. We forget that, like, if you were to build your own house, and I know people who have built their own homes, they did do these things, and they did the math. They realized that I could spend an extra $5 now, but I'm saving $500 over the course of for every $5 spent, $500 or $5,000 over the life of the house.
Right.
And so but people don't want to do that. But so in this book, Self-Sufficient Home, I go into those details. I also interviewed a lot of people who, they were their own food producers, their own power producers, how to save rain, how to purify it, and there's some big and small systems. Oh, this is the book that has my toilet experiment.
I wanted to mention that. Didn't you grow tomatoes in humanure?
So, okay, so number one, I have in this book, it's in the squatter book too, but there's more details in here. But in this book, let me see if I can find the page. I talk about, this is a design from China and India. So let me see if I can, does that help? These are just schematics of Indian and Chinese methane digester designs. Okay, people can get it in this book. You can buy an e-book, or you can just go online and buy it, at my store. But so the idea of digesting human manure, that's been with us from the beginning of time. My grandfather had an outhouse, and then they had a cesspool where the toilet goes out to a big thing in the yard back behind the barn. He had 50 acres, but the idea that our human waste is strictly waste is a modern concept. So in China, they've used it they decompose it and use it for food forever. That's changing because they're modernizing. And modernization, people don't want to think about it. But human waste, there is really no waste in nature. That's the thing people have to get. There really is no waste. In your garden, all the so-called waste is future compost. When you raise mushrooms, all the so-called waste it turns into soil. It turns into more mushrooms. So I had known all of that. And then I had known people that did various methane digestion experiments. But I was really, when I was living as a squatter at this place in Highland Park, my goal was to really experiment with, what if we had a nuclear winter and I had to stay inside and the toilet wasn't working? I know this was a crazy scenario. Or what if there was an earthquake and the drain wasn't working? Now, I could have just dug a hole in the yard, really. But what we did was we bought a Big Five. We bought a RV toilet, which was nothing but a bucket inside a bucket with a lid. Okay, so I turned off the toilet. I told and there was just 3 of us living there. Eventually I had 2 other people living with me during the period I was there. And we had guests occasionally, but I told everybody, this is a 30-day experiment. That's all, 30 days. We're not using the flush toilet. We're using this bucket and then first thing we found is that, that's going to be there until it's almost full, then somebody has to empty it. So I had a trench in the yard. The trench was probably, I want to say, about 1.5 feet by 5 feet long. So every time the bucket was full, it got dumped in the trench, and then I put some wormy compost from my compost, and straw over it. And it was about 3 feet deep, so it kind of could fill up. Now, the first challenge we had was that we didn't want to use that blue stuff they give you in toilets.
Right.
That blue stuff, I'm sure it keeps the smell down, it's a disinfectant, but we're putting it in our yard. I don't know what
Right.
that stuff is.
Right.
And I don't, you know, that stuff, when you do use it, where does it go? To the ocean eventually?
Right.
So you have to think, you know, when you do permaculture and you do gardening, you start thinking about all these loops, you know, all of these products that you use, you don't want to pollute the water somewhere else either. At least a conscientious person does not want to. Anyway, we experimented. We had a lemon tree. We could squeeze lemons and put lemon in there after each use. That was really good.
Okay.
But then we thought, but we'd like to eat those lemons. We don't want to use all those lemons up. Plus, the average person isn't going to have an endless supply of lemons. We really did have a lot of lemons from a tree in the yard. And then we tried baking soda. Baking soda works really good. But then we thought, well, you have to buy baking soda. In an emergency, you're going to run out really quick. Baking soda probably, it has multiple uses. Then, because I told you we had a wood stove that we used outside, we did some cooking on the wood stove, we have ash.
Ash.
We have a forever source of ash. So I'd put the ash in a little bucket with a scoop. After each toilet use, we'd put some ash in there. Perfect. No odor, no flies, nothing like that. And so I always recommend ash. Now, a lot of people who are using non-flush toilets these days just use wood chips or sawdust, which works too. It absorbs the moisture, and then they dump it. Now, the other challenge, I had a log book there too. I wanted everybody to date when they used it and to write. It had some columns for writing different experiments. Was it a bad experience, a good experience? And some of that is in my book. You know, I extracted, I don't think I have, I might actually still have those notes now that I think about it. I have so many notes that I've kept over the years, but I extracted the highlights from different people. One person said, terrible experience, I'm never going to come back here again, whatever. But really the challenging part was when the toilet got full, we had 3 in our house, so we were all each supposed to empty it. I noticed that curiously, the other 2 people were almost never there when it got full. So I did most of the emptying. You know, I empty it, wash it out, and then put the sawdust put some wormy compost and straw there. So after the 30 days, we went back to the regular toilet, and then I topped off the plot with compost and straw, and I planted tomatoes. And they were cherry tomatoes, best cherry tomatoes I've ever grown. Now, one of the things that when you study agriculture, and nobody really knows how agriculture began, you know, I mean, we figure it's trial and error. Some people say a wise man came from the stars and taught people agriculture, but you know, who knows? In the fecal pits, in the toilet pits that you'd have around villages or around wherever, you know, people weren't nomadic all the time. You had some spots where you hung out for a while, but people would notice that certain things would grow in the middens, you know, your dumping areas. And members of the nightshade family seem to survive going through the human body. And maybe they germinate well, like tomatoes. Tomatoes originated in the Andes or South America, in the high mountain areas. Tomatoes and potatoes both. They were not considered important foods until they began to be domesticated and cultivated. But in any event, people probably noted that about the tomatoes and then began to save seeds and figure it out. People are pretty bright. They can figure things out in a few generations. But in any event, I think that's how people figured it out. But we've known that tomatoes do grow well in sewage. So not all plants will. But so I planted them, and we had a great crop of very tasty sweet tomatoes. And I don't know if this was in the book or not, Matt, but we had a gathering at the nonprofit. It was one of our all-day seminars where people are sharing different reports. We'd share a meal, and then I shared a salad with those tomatoes. and somebody said, "Well, these are really good tomatoes. And where'd you get them?" I said, "Yeah, I grew them," and I didn't want to talk about it really. And then because I didn't. That really wasn't my plan. And then. But then somebody insisted, no, these are really exceptional. I really want to know. So I explained what I did, one lady stopped her fork in midair and most of the people thought that's awesome. But one lady said, I think you should have told us this. This is, and she was really upset. She didn't storm out of there or anything, but she didn't eat any more of the salad either. But this is all in your mind.
It's in your mind.
It's all because think about what happens through nature when things break down and the roots are absorbing the nutrients. If it was a potato that was grown in there, I could have understand some of the scorn or disgust or whatever, but it was a tomato. So the roots absorbed the moisture. It went through the plant, went through the leaves, went through the flower, the fruit. It's totally safe. I eat them raw. I had already been eating them raw. I never got sick. So, but that whole period of my life was a very interesting time.
That is fascinating. You know a lot about Native American history and lifestyle as well, right? You do a lot of, I saw on your Instagram recently, you had an arrow making workshop, and it seems like a lot of the naturalist and survivalist and foraging skills are stuff that the Native Americans would have used. You want to talk about any of that?
Sure. I mean, indigenous people everywhere in the world practiced, they had to make things. So making something, whether it's your clothes, your tools, your house, your weapons, and hunting, that was normal. It's just like saying, like before, somebody once asked me, well, do you think Jesus grew organic foods? And I'm thinking, of course, that's all there was. There were no petrochemicals back then. And so the indigenous skills are what everybody did. And as people got modernized, we sort of dropped those. And so a lot of how to make fire with the bow and drill, how to make your bow, how to make your arrows, those became like lost arts. I mean, that's what Larry Dean Olsen taught. And I always marveled at that. I mean, I think one of the best books is Mystic Warriors of the Plains. I think the Mystic Warriors of the Plains, it's a huge coffee table type book. It's an awesome book. It's a practical, it's the word mystic is there, but it's really about how the native people made things. I think Males is the author, M-A-I-L-S. But that was one of my favorite books. But I had several such books learning, and just so you know, I always felt an affinity to Native Americans. I was a good friend of a lot of the local Native people. I got to know them when I was studying botany. I'm only 1% Native. I'm mostly Hungarian. My ancestry is Hungarian, and 8% African, 1% Native of the U.S. But so I have an odd mix, and even that it's a little more complicated. But and by the way, when Hollywood used to want Native Americans and they couldn't find them, most of them are Caucasians that you see in the early days, but then they would use Hungarians because there's some Hungarians are very dark skinned and they could pass for Native Americans, which is I knew a Hungarian guy, very dark skinned, and he looks very different from me, and not that he was an actor, but anyway, the skills that people did were largely forgotten because, well, let's just say making arrows. Native people, when they hunted, they would learn how to flake the stone, and it didn't take a long time to do it. You just make a functional arrowhead. What the hobbyists are making today is infinitely better than what the natives did because they're using modern tools most of the time. They're not under adverse conditions using a rock hitting another rock. And so in the old days they would just flake a stone and try to make a sharp edge. I think I have I buy them for my classes. We do flint knapping classes, but I also buy them by the bag. These are just little arrowheads I buy. Guys make these, and it's a good shape, but it has to be good in the cross section too. It has to be flat. It can't have curves. You've got a little bulge there. But I spend about 30 cents for each of these. For me to make them, it's very time consuming. So I teach it. I teach people how to do it. People get cut up. And so when Native people used to do this, and then the pioneers came in with their covered wagons and all those pieces of metal, they would attack wagons, and the people of the day wondered, why did they take the whole wagon apart? Because they'd come, the people are dead, and the wagon is all scattered. All the parts are broken down because they went after the metal. They took the metal. They would take the metal straps on the wheels and flatten them out and sharpen them, and then you have a quick arrow point, which was totally superior to the stone points. And so once you had European stuff for trade or to get, flint knapping among the native people died up. And, you know, which is true about most of the skills. The basketry, there were baskets that native people don't call white man's baskets. They were the baskets that were made to sell for tourists to trade. They weren't the type that were used anymore. The coiled baskets are arguably poor style of baskets, even though they're popular among tourists and at museums. But most people didn't use a coiled basket because it's very time consuming. I mean, the last good one that I made took me 60 hours. Of course, I was still learning. But all of these skills are, you know, if you think about, they're producing things from nature, from what you have in your environment. You know, like yesterday, I taught students how to make bowls out of clay that I dug from the local mountains. We had to grind it, mix with water, knead it, and they made these different shapes. And this was just children playing with clay. They probably had clay before, so they knew how to make things, but the clay that they had was bought from a store where they processed it, so it was all ready to go. No real work. This was raw stuff from the mountains. And so that's what Native Americans had to deal with. So for me, that's what got me into botany. There were people, you know, when you're in school as a child, you learn about the world and you're trying to understand the world and all this stuff in the world, and the adults know more than you do. And it's a very complicated world, but we've made it complicated. We've made it complicated with our technology, which we can live without, we can survive without. We've made it complicated with our cars, you know, with our financial system. But people did live off the land, and they had to basically everything you made was biodegradable. Okay, and you had to live within your means, and you had to forge agreements and commitments with other people. You were not a Rambo. You were not an independent entity. Part of your survival was tactfully forging relationships with people who maybe you had some disagreements with. And that was done on a kind of a local level. It had to be. Nevertheless, in North America, you know, as I slowly learned these things, I've taken classes, I've taught classes, you know, and it's really fascinating when people say Native Americans. Not everybody knows this. Natives know this, but there is no homogenous group called the Native Americans, just like there's no homogenous group called the white people or the black people or the Africans or the Asians. There's no homogenous group. They're so diverse. And so in Native Americans probably had 500 to 600 languages here in North America. We're not taught in school that you had 3 or 4 arguably civilizations in North America before Columbus got here. You know, you had the Anasazi were arguably a full-blown civilization. There was 2 races of people, not one. They had a civil war by the 14th century or so, and they all split. You have all of those adobes and cliff dwellings empty. They all left. There was drought, but we know there was civil war and strife as well. You have the Mississippian people who built the mounds, and Cahokia was, you know, Cahokia, Illinois, not far from you, is the largest mound north of Mexico City. And everything about it shouts Cahokia. Have you heard of that, Matt?
We have mounds in Indiana. I haven't heard of the ones in Illinois.
Cahokia, you should learn about, because it's not that far from you. It's just a little to your west, I think. But Cahokia was it shouts Mayan. Everything about it shouts Mayan. It came into being about the year 1000, 1050, a little bit after the decline of the Maya civilization. People probably just floated up on boats up the rivers, started a civilization, and there's no evidence that Cahokia people had a war or anything or a drought, but they all left at a certain time. That's that's typical of Maya things. The priest says it's time to go. So to me, it shouts religious theocracy right there in the United States. And we hardly know that that was there. I think it's because we wanted to erase our history to say that there was nobody here. This was made for the Europeans coming in. It's our country. There's manifest destiny. And it was easier to pretend that we weren't killing off another people to be here. And there are others too, but when I was in high school, I got to know the local botanists, the different native people who were skilled botanists, and I learned from them. And then my wife, Dolores, her mother was adopted by Luther Standing Bear. So Luther Standing Bear was a chief of the Lakota who eventually moved to Hollywood to be an actor and dancer. He wrote a lot of books like My People, the Sioux. And so when I'd go to my mother-in-law's library, that was fascinating. They had an unbelievable amount of artifacts. All of her friends were Navajo, by the way. And she wrote a book eventually called, this was written by my wife Dolores' mother, The Wind Erases Your Footprints. So her best friend in the 30s married a Navajo man. She was a Caucasian woman, married a Navajo, moved to the reservation during the Depression. This is the story of that life on the reservation during the Depression when, nobody had work. And it was all about what it took to get by. The husband was a silversmith, Navajo silversmith, and but nobody had food, nobody had money. You would always share. So it was an insight into about a generation of life on the reservation in Taos and thereabouts. And then there's a little, there's like an understory of Navajo witchcraft, which is really fascinating. Yeah, this is a fascinating book. So I got to know that side of the indigenous people. And when Dolores and her mother, they both have passed away, I ended up with Luther's pipe and moccasins and his robes and books, boxes of stuff. So there is a museum at Crazy Horse Museum or Crazy Horse Monument in South Dakota. You can go there and see Luther's things that I gave to them.
No way.
In the museum, yeah.
I went there when I was a kid. My parents dragged me there, and I was like 14, so I hated it. But I had no idea.
It probably didn't look like much then.
Really?
But it's going to be the biggest carved monument in the world once it's done. I mean, it's essentially 4 to 5 times bigger than Mount Rushmore. It's huge. Wow. And when you were a kid, my stuff. Well, you're about 17 now, so maybe no, it wouldn't have been there when you were a child.
I'm actually -4. I'm not going to be born until. Yeah. Excuse me.
But the Native American skills were, they were not to be cool or to be fun. They were survival skills. People did it because that's what you had to do. And frankly, when Larry Dean Olsen was teaching his outdoor survival skills to students, most of the native people who knew the skills were too busy trying to stay alive.
Right.
Because this is a gross generalization, but what most non-native people don't realize is they're the forgotten third world people. They're the forgotten minority here in North America. In like Lakota lands, Navajo lands. Some of them are wealthy, but I think they're kind of the exception. So when people talk about being thankful at Thanksgiving for all of our good things that God has given us, well, the early Thanksgiving, I always give a special lesson about what the so-called first Thanksgiving was really all about. And although there might have been religious overtones, it was really about one of the local chiefs who tried to form a treaty with the settlers. I think his name was Smith on that plantation. And they forged a treaty. They had a party. The boys got together, played with their weapons. They ate a lot of food, and the natives won that battle but lost the war because that was the first colony where they didn't kick out the Europeans coming in. Where they did to that date, they said you can visit us, but you got to move along. You're not going to stay in our land. That was the first where they let them stay. And then they just flooded in, and then the rest we kind of know about. The natives, they certainly were not repaid with generosity for what they, what they shared in terms of survival skills. So in any event, that's a sort of a dark side of American history too. but there is a lot to learn from the native skills and the native belief systems, the native government systems, the native healing systems. I mean, I still have, we offer classes in some of the native healing systems with a doctor. It's on our website. I think our next one is in December. But all of these I try to draw upon. I mean, to give honor to people that have come before, you know, and just to, I mean, my thing is, people who feel there's no hope in the world, there's always hope. It's not about waiting for government or waiting for some great savior to do something. You know, you have to take action and do things on your own. Even the guru types that I've met, that people think that the gurus are supposed to save you, or Jesus is going to save you, or somebody's going to save you. I mean, I don't want to speak bad, but there was a religious group that I was involved with shortly just to study, and they said that I don't need to be worried about all this ecology stuff and not worrying about polluting because Jesus is going to come and clean everything up. And I said, really? Really? And then there's a little joke that I told them that they didn't find funny. And here's the joke. A man, I think you'll appreciate it. A man heard that the area he lived in was going to get flooded. And they knocked on his door and said, you know, let's evacuate. This is going to get flooded. He said, no, the Lord is going to save you. I said, okay, can't force you. When the water was up to the first floor, the guy in a boat came to his second story window and said, come on, you got to get out. This whole place is flooding. He said, don't worry, go away. The Lord's going to save me. And then next, the helicopter came, and he was on the roof. And he said, come on, you got to get out of here. The water's rising. He said, go away, the Lord will save me. And so he died. You know, okay, so he died. And then when he's checking into heaven, they said, oh, you know, you lived a really good life. And then I guess what did they say? St. Peter said, what was going on down there? I was wondering the same thing. I thought the Lord was going to save me. He said, what do you mean? We sent the guy to your door. We sent the guy in the boat. We sent the helicopter. You turned us down. So I told that to the religious group who told me that I shouldn't be worried about all those things. They said, that's not very funny. You know, they said, because the Jesus is going to come and clean. I said, really? Isn't the whole essence of saviorness to save yourself? Wise up, learn what you have to do. Why is that the antithesis of your belief system? Why is that wrong? I don't get it. So anyway, that's what I tell people. You learn what you should do and then just do it the best that you can in your own life. That's why I like what you're doing. You're a savior of sorts. You're telling people how to take discards and grow food. That's awesome. Right?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's the solution a lot of the times is within yourself, or if you just start opening your eyes and looking around and seeing what you can do. It's easy to be hopeless, but when you actually start looking at things that you can do, it has a big effect on you, more than you'd think. Like exercising, I fell out of exercising for a while, and I've lately been getting back into it, and it's just as amazing as just jogging around the block or doing some yoga in the morning makes you feel. It gives you a whole new mindset, and that's just something very simple that you can do. And I love these simple multipliers, I guess you'd call it, where you do one little thing and the results are exponential.
Never forget, remember Jesus did say, and this is not a religious thing, but your body is your temple.
Absolutely.
So if these survivalists that I know that are overweight and have a poor diet, they need to quit worrying about accumulating more guns and knives and gold and silver and stored food. They need to exercise and get back to basics. Hey, Matt, I have to run. I hope you can tell people to read my books and look at my website. Do you want me to tell you what it is?
Please. Plug it all.
And it's www.schoolofselfreliance.com, schoolofself-reliance.com. And I have videos they can look at. There's radio shows that I did they can look at. My schedule of classes is there. All of the books are there. I have not podcasts, but video shows. I have hundreds of hours of video classes. People can sign up, and we send you a link, and you can do a lot of my classes in the luxury of your home.
Awesome.
Okay?
Very cool. Well, thanks so much for your time. It was good chat. Good to seeing you again and good
And I'm
talking.
sure when you put this together, you'll make my hair look good, make me look better than I do, right?
I'm gonna put a TikTok filter so you'll have a little cat nose and some hearts
Right.
over your.
I know you do the right thing. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Absolutely. Take care.
Adios.
All right. Bye.